In 1943, a British psychologist named Kenneth Craik wrote that the mind builds small-scale models of reality and uses them to try out alternatives before acting.
That is a description of a world model, written 2 years before von Neumann even set down the design for a stored program computer, and 5 years before the first one ran. There was no machine that could test it. There would not be one for 80 years.
This series has told that story 6 times now. An idea arrives. The machine cannot test it. The idea sits, sometimes for decades, and then the machine catches up, and we finally find out whether the idea was right.
Perceptrons waited for compute. Backpropagation waited for data and 4 GPUs. The transformer waited for a machine that could do enormous parallel matrix multiplication cheaply.
So the obvious question for a final episode is, what is waiting now?
And we want to be careful about how we answer that, because the honest answer is not a prediction. We are not going to tell you what comes after large language models.
We are going to do something more useful and more in keeping with everything we have shown you. We are going to work out how you would know.
Quick note, this is education, not advice of any kind. AI moves fast, so treat it as a map, not gospel, and go try it yourself.
Let's put the whole series in one shape, because 6 episodes have been building one argument.
An idea appears. It needs a machine. The machine that exists determines whether the idea can be tested at all. If it can be tested, it gets validated or killed. And either way, that result changes what people build next, in ideas and in silicon.
Episode 1. The idea arrived before the machine. Turing described learning machines with no hardware to run them on.
Episode 2. The right ideas looked wrong, because the machines of the day could not show them working.
Episode 3. Machines won enormous public victories and then failed to generalize because they were built around the shape of one problem.
Episode 4. A chip that failed at its intended job, graphics hardware repurposed, opened the door to deep learning.
Episode 5. AI compute broke away from Moore's law, and the loop started running much faster than the underlying transistor scaling.
In Episode 6, the bottleneck moved from arithmetic to memory, and then out past the chip entirely, to the interconnect between hundreds of chips.
Which is where we left you with a question. The machine is now specialized all the way out to the optical fabric. So what happens to an idea that does not fit it? Before we answer that, we should say something uncomfortable about why the current idea won.
The usual story is that the transformer was a better idea, and it is a very good idea. But the series suggests a less flattering explanation, and we think it is closer to true.
The transformer won because it matched the machine. It was parallel, so a GPU could saturate. It was dense, so the arithmetic was regular. It removed the sequential dependency that made recurrent networks slow, which is exactly the property that let it scale.
Episode 5 showed the numbers. The transformer arrives at the moment when parallel compute was becoming cheap and abundant, and it is the architecture best shaped to absorb it.
Now, that is not an accusation. Matching the machine is not cheating. Every validated idea in this series matched a machine. That is the whole loop.
But it does have a consequence people skip past. If the ideas that get tested are the ideas that fit the machine, then the machine is a filter on the space of ideas.
And a very specialized machine is a very tight filter. So we come to the part of the episode where people usually pick a side, and we would like to refuse.
2 things are true at once. Large language models are extraordinarily useful. Genuinely, economically, in production, for hundreds of millions of people. That is not in question, and we are not going to pretend it is.
And competence with language is not the same thing as understanding the physical world. Those are different claims, and holding both is not a contradiction.
The failure mode we want to avoid is the one this series has criticized in others, taking a real limitation and inflating it into, this approach is finished.
Episode 3 is the cautionary tale. Deep Blue beat Kasparov, and people concluded machines could think. They could not. But the opposite error is just as easy. People looked at neural networks in 1970 and concluded they were a dead end, and they were wrong for 40 years.
So, no wall talk. The claim we are actually making is narrower, and it is about shape, not about limits.
The most prominent person making that argument is Yann, one of the 3 researchers who won the Turing Award for deep learning, and until the end of 2025, the chief AI scientist at Meta. He left after 12 years and now runs a startup called AMI Labs.
In December 2024, he put the argument to the United Nations Security Council, and because it is his own written text, we can quote it exactly.
He said, "Current AI technology is very focused on text and language, not on the real world. This limits its applicability. Current AI systems do not understand the real world, do not have persistent memory, cannot reason, cannot plan. They cannot learn new skills with the same speed and efficiency as humans and animals."
4 claims there, and we want to flag the last one especially, because it comes back at the end of this episode. Not, they cannot learn. They cannot learn with the same speed and efficiency.
That is an argument about efficiency, not capability. Hold on to it.
His proposed alternative has a name, Joint Embedding Predictive Architecture, JPA, and it is set out in a 2022 position paper called A Path Towards Autonomous Machine Intelligence. As far as we can find, he has not published a position paper superseding it.
We should say plainly that this is a position, not a settled result. Plenty of serious researchers disagree. What makes it worth an episode is not that he is right, it is that his argument is testable, and until recently, it mostly was not. So what is the alternative actually proposing? The clearest framework we have found was published this June by Fei-Fei and the team at World Labs, and we are going to use hers rather than invent one.
She splits world models into 3 kinds by what they output. A renderer outputs pixels, observations meant for human eyes, where the quality that matters is visual fidelity. A simulator outputs state, a geometrically or physically faithful representation that programs can compute on. A planner outputs actions. Given an observation and a goal, what should the agent do next?
And her line about how they connect is the one worth remembering. Simulation is the bridge between the two. A planner is only as good as the simulator it plans against.
She traces the underlying idea back to Kenneth Craik in 1943, the small-scale models we opened on, and grounds the loop in the agent and environment framing from reinforcement learning.
Now, the technical question is, what a machine should predict. The naive approach is to predict the next frames of video in pixels. LeCun's own description of why that fails: you get blurry predictions because the system cannot exactly predict what's going to happen.
The GPA answer is to predict in representation space instead. Meta's V-JEPA 2 paper states the reason better than any paraphrase. The approach focuses on predictable aspects of a scene, for example, the trajectory of an object in motion, while ignoring unpredictable details that generative objectives emphasize, such as the precise location of each blade of grass in a field or each leaf on a tree.
That is the whole idea in one sentence. Do not model the grass. Model the ball. So where has this actually got to? And here we want to be as careful as episode 3 was about Deep Blue, because there are a lot of very impressive demonstrations in this field.
The useful discipline is to take Fei-Fei's own taxonomy and apply it to her own company's product. World Labs shipped a system called Marble, generally available since November 2025. It takes text, images, video, or a sketch, and generates explorable 3D environments.
By her own description, Marble outputs Gaussian splots for visual exploration. That is, the rendering part, alongside collision meshes a physics engine can operate on. And she calls it our first move into this territory, meaning simulation.
So, the accurate verdict is more interesting than either headline. Marble is a renderer that also emits collision geometry. It sits on the boundary. It hands structure to an external physics engine. It does not itself simulate dynamics.
And here is the sharpest thing in her essay, which cuts against a lot of what gets posted online. By her taxonomy, systems that generate video frames in real time as you steer, World Labs' own RTFM and Google's Genie 3 are classified as renderers.
Real-time interactive world generation is still rendering. Interactivity is not simulation. That is a genuinely counterintuitive point, and it is theirs, not ours.
The company's trajectory tells the story better than any claim. Research preview of a real-time frame model, then Marble generally available, then a World API, then in July they acquired a simulation company, then a research post about using generated worlds to train robots.
A company that shipped a renderer is buying its way toward the simulator, the rung its own founder calls the linchpin. You do not need to speculate about where this is going. You can just watch what they purchase.
Now, the technical heart of the episode, and we are going to show you an argument we got partly wrong, because the corrected version is better.
Start from episode 6. Generating a token is memory-bound. You read the entire model out of memory to produce one output. The arithmetic is trivial. The reading is the cost.
The economic fix is batching. Read the weights once, and use that one read to serve 64 users at the same time. The cost of the read gets divided across all of them.
Our first version of this argument said, an agent thinking step by step cannot be batched because step 11 needs step 10's output. Sequential dependency. So an agent looks to the hardware like batch size 1, and tokens get expensive.
And that is wrong. Sequential dependency within one session says nothing about concurrency across sessions. Your agent's step 11 and someone else's step 3 are completely independent, and a production server batches them together happily.
This is measured, not theoretical. There is a system from Berkeley and DeepMind called Autelix, built specifically for agentic workloads, and it reports handling 10 additional concurrent calls to fill out its batches. Agentic decode gets batched across programs, so the cost argument fails.
We should also concede that you can partly batch a sequence with itself, using a trick called speculative decoding. A small draft model guesses several tokens ahead, and the big model verifies all of them in one pass. One read, several tokens of progress. Published speedups are around 3 times.
But something survives all of that, and it is the sharper claim.
Batching is a throughput technology. It is not a latency technology. It converts spare memory bandwidth into more users served. It cannot convert it into one chain finishing sooner. In fact, larger batches make each individual step slightly slower.
So, if what you care about is how fast a single chain of reasoning completes, an agent working through a task, a world model rolled forward step by step, the GPU's economic fix does not help you at all. Tokens get cheap. Wall clock does not.
And the real indictment is measured. That same Autelix paper found agentic programs experience long cumulative wait times primarily due to head-of-line blocking, and that scheduling them properly improved throughput by 4 to 15 times at the same latency.
4 to 15 times of headroom over the best open serving stack tells you the stack was not built for this shape of work, and Autelix recovered it in software on the same GPU.
Which is worth being precise about, because it sharpens what hardware actually has to fix. Scheduling is fixable in software. The floor on how fast a single step can run is not. That one is set by memory bandwidth, and no scheduler moves it. So, the honest sentence is, agentic workloads are not badly served because they cannot be batched. They are badly served because they wait.
There is a lovely inversion buried in this too. The same sequential dependency that stops you batching a chain with itself is what makes each step's input almost free. The context is nearly identical to the last step, so the cache hit rate inside a single program runs above 90%.
The property that hurts you is the property that helps you. This series is full of those, which brings us to the real question. If the next idea is latency-bound rather than throughput-bound, what would a machine built for it look like?
And there is a general form to this question that we think is the most useful thing in this episode. Every AI chip is an answer to one question.
Where do you put the memory, and what do you give up for it?
A GPU answers it with HBM, high bandwidth memory, sitting beside the die. That is a compromise. And it is a compromise because HBM is doing 2 different jobs at once. It has to hold the model, which wants capacity, and it has to feed the arithmetic, which wants bandwidth.
Those 2 goals pull in opposite directions, and HBM splits the difference. So what happens if you refuse to split it? Cerebras builds a chip cut from an entire wafer. Not a die cut from a wafer. The wafer. 46,000 square millimeters, 4 trillion transistors, 900,000 cores.
And the number that matters is not any of those. It is the memory. The wafer carries 44 gigabytes of on-chip SRAM, and that memory runs at 21 petabytes per second.
Compare that with an NVIDIA B200, 192 gigabytes of HBM at 8 terabytes per second.
So Cerebras has roughly 2,600 times the bandwidth and about a quarter of the capacity. That one row is the entire architecture.
They refused the compromise. They took a small amount of memory and made it absurdly fast, and pushed capacity out to a separate tier.
And in the regime where the model fits, it works exactly as the physics predicts. On independent third-party benchmarking of the same open model across 17 providers, Cerebras runs at 1,893 tokens per second. The next fastest specialist is 702. A major cloud is 309.
There is a detail in that benchmark worth pausing on, because it demonstrates the framework we just built better than anything we could construct.
The benchmark reports two different latencies: time to the very first chunk of output, and time to the first token of the actual answer, which for a reasoning model comes after all the internal thinking.
On time to first chunk, Cerebras is not the fastest. Google Vertex is at 0.4 of a second against Cerebras' half second.
On time to first answer token, Cerebras wins by 4.5 times, 1.5 seconds against 7.
And that split is exactly the prefill and decode distinction. The first chunk is dominated by prefill, which is compute-bound, so a GPU cloud can win it. Everything after is decode, which is bandwidth-bound, and that is where a wafer full of SRAM is untouchable.
One row of a benchmark table, and it confirms the whole framework.
On the other side, because a segment like that without the limits is an advertisement.
First, and most important, Cerebras did not remove the capacity problem. It relocated it. The full model lives in an external memory appliance and streams onto the wafer. That path runs at about 150 gigabyte per second,
which is roughly 22 times slower than an H100's memory. So when Cerebras says the system supports models of up to 24 trillion parameters, that is true in the sense that the model fits in the system. It is misleading if you hear it as 24 trillion parameters at 21 petabytes per second.
Second, capacity is the weak side, and the arithmetic is unforgiving. A 70 billion parameter model at 16-bit precision is 140 gigabytes. That fits on one H200. It needs 4 wafer scale systems.
Third, it is not the cheap option. On published list prices, it charges about a quarter more per output token than Groq does, to deliver roughly 4 times the tokens per second. That is a real premium, and it buys speed, not savings.
And fourth, which is newer and more uncomfortable, the same benchmark now measures how much of a model's accuracy each provider's endpoint actually preserves. Cerebras scores 87% against a self-hosted reference. Groq 86. Amazon is at 101.
The same open-weight model does not give you the same answers depending on who serves it. We should be careful here. That measures an endpoint, not a chip, and the cause could be quantization or sampling settings or configuration. We are not going to assert why.
But speed is not free is a fair summary, and it is measured by someone with no stake in the answer.
One more conditional worth naming. The models Cerebras serves best are disproportionately mixture of experts, architectures where the total parameter count is huge, but only a small fraction is active for any given token.
That is close to ideal for a small, blazing memory with a large, slow backing store, and close to worst case for a dense model of the same total size. So part of its advantage is a bet that this model shape stays dominant.
Which is exactly the kind of conditional bet this series has watched decide winners and losers before. So let us turn that into something you can reuse, because you are going to read a lot of accelerator announcements over the next few years.
4 questions. 1. What is the fast memory capacity, and what is its bandwidth? Both numbers. Always both. A bandwidth claim with no capacity number is incomplete by construction.
2. When the fast memory runs out, where does capacity live, and how fast is the path to it? This is where most architectures quietly become ordinary. It is the memory X question.
3. Which regime does the advantage bind in? Single stream latency, batch throughput, training, or capacity-bound serving? Every vendor benchmarks in its winning regime. The interesting question is what happens in the other 3.
4. What model shape does it assume? Dense or sparse, long context or short, prefill heavy or decode heavy. Architectural advantages are usually conditional on a model shape that may not persist.
Ask those 4 of anything, and marketing separates from engineering very quickly.
And to show you those questions, generalize. Let's ask them of a machine at the complete opposite end of the scale.
NVIDIA sells a desktop machine called DGX Spark, 128 gigabytes of unified memory, in a box that draws, measured independently, under 200 watts.
Apply question 1. Capacity, 128 gigabytes, which is more than an H100 has. Bandwidth, 273 gigabytes per second.
Which is about 12 times less than an H100 and roughly 30 times less than a B200.
So, there it is, the same trade running the other way. Cerebras bought bandwidth and gave up capacity. This buys capacity and gives up bandwidth. The same question, opposite answers.
And what you get for that is not speed, it is locality. A model of real size, running on your desk, in a box that draws less power than a hairdryer, with no data leaving the room.
There is a concrete illustration here, though we should be precise about what it shows. On the ARC Prize's 2026 milestone, which we will come to properly in a moment, the top 3 entries all ran small open-weight models locally under a compute cap.
And that is partly by rule rather than by choice. The competition disables internet access during evaluation, so no API-based system can enter at all.
But the rule is the interesting part. They built it that way because they are measuring efficiency, not spending. And under those conditions, small local models are what the leaders reach for. Before we get to how you would know, we should name the thing that might matter more than any chip.
For world models, the bottleneck may not be compute at all. It may be data, and specifically a kind of data almost nobody has collected.
Fei-Fei puts it directly. 3-dimensional data with explicit geometry, material properties, and physical annotations is orders of magnitude scarcer than the internet video that renderers train on. And the gap between simulation and reality persists.
Which should sound extremely familiar if you watched episode 3. Neural networks did not take off when the algorithms got better. They took off when ImageNet existed.
And the person making this point is the person who built ImageNet. She has seen exactly this bottleneck before, from the inside.
So one honest possibility is that world models are not waiting for a machine at all. They may be waiting for their ImageNet.
Which brings us to the part we promised. Not a prediction, but a test. How would you know if this idea is working?
The single best instrument we have found is ARC-AGI 3, launched in March. It is a set of interactive game environments with, and this is the design, no instructions, no rules, and no stated goals. You have to explore, work out the rules, form a plan, and act over a long horizon.
Humans score 100%. That is from a controlled in-person study with 458 participants. First attempt, same information given to people and machines.
Frontier AI systems score 0.5%.
And notice what that benchmark is. Interactive, sequentially dependent, long horizon. It is precisely the computational shape we spent scene 8 on. The shape today's machine serves worst.
So the argument and the evidence are the same claim measured 2 different ways. The workload the hardware is worst at is the workload where the gap between humans and machines is widest.
The other thing ARC Prize insists on is efficiency, and this is not our framing. It is theirs. Their position is that intelligence is not just whether you can solve the problem, but at what cost. They now report every result with an efficiency metric, and their co-founder put it bluntly, naked accuracy scores are marketing, not science.
The illustration is stark. On the earlier benchmark, a human panel scores about 64% at a measured $17 a task. A frontier model reached 87.5% at $4,560 a task on ARC Prize's current pricing. That run cost nearly $500,000 in total, and did not count toward the ranking because it exceeded the competition's own cost limit.
Which is LeCun's sentence from scene 5, made numerical. Not cannot learn with the same speed and efficiency.
And ARC Prize's own summary of where things stand is, we think, the best one-line statement of this entire series thesis. The accuracy gap is now bottlenecked by engineering, while the efficiency gap remains bottlenecked by science and ideas.
So, here are the tells. Long horizon consistency. Can it stay coherent over hundreds of steps? Reliable physics. And remember Meta's own finding that current video models are at or close to chance at telling possible from impossible. Transfer from simulation to reality. Continual learning and affordable local inference.
If those move together, something real is happening. If capability scores climb while efficiency stays flat, that is the machine being bought, not the idea being validated.
So, to close a series about ideas and silicon building each other.
We started this episode with Kenneth Craik in 1943, describing small-scale models of reality with no machine that could run one. 80 years later, there are systems that generate explorable worlds, and there are chips built specifically to run a single chain of reasoning as fast as physics allows.
That does not mean the idea is right. Meta's own benchmark says current video models cannot reliably tell physically possible from impossible. World Lab's own founder says the demos are narrower than they look. The best interactive reasoning score is 0.5% against a human 100.
But for the first time, the idea is testable. And this whole series has been about what happens in the gap between an idea and its test.
Here is what we would leave you with. For 60 years, there was essentially one machine, and it got faster. Ideas that fit it were tested. Ideas that did not, waited.
What is different now is not that the machine is faster. It is that the machine is being built in several directions at once. A wafer that trades capacity for bandwidth. A desktop that trades bandwidth for locality. Optics moving inside the box. Each of those widens the set of ideas that can be tested at all.
And that is the real answer to what comes after large language models. It will not be the most elegant idea. It never has been.
It will be the one the machine can finally test.
Thank you for coming with us through all 7 of these. Ideas and silicon have been building each other for 80 years, and neither one has ever finished the job alone. That's a wrap. If this made AI a little clearer, hit subscribe. It helps more curious people find the show. See you next time.